So first off this afternoon, I've got Dr. Janine Rowse, who's going to talk about technology-facilitated sexual assault. And that's not a term I don't think any of you will have heard of, but I think we should be a little bit more aware about it.
Thank you. So before starting, I'd just like to remind everyone in the room that this the presentation I'm about to give does discuss themes of child sexual assault and violence towards children. But I'd also like to thank you for choosing to be here in this room right now, so we can shine a light on something that I think all too often hides in the shadows. And I'd really like to thank the Don't Forget the Bubbles team for supporting us in sharing this information and shining a light on it. So I'm going to be talking about technology-facilitated sexual assault and some research that we've done in this area. By way of background, I was a GP previously. Turns out I'm terrible at sticking to 15-minute appointments. So I've retrained in clinical forensic medicine and recently fellowed as a relatively new medical fellowship in clinical forensic medicine under the College of Pathologists. I'm a forensic physician now at the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine, and as part of my training had the absolute privilege of also working and training at the Victorian Forensic Paediatric Medical Service in Melbourne, which is the health service that provides frontline clinical forensic services to children. The research I'm going to be presenting is how we did during my time there, and we continue to work on this research today in an ongoing capacity. And I think actually presenting here today, I was quite nervous. It's quite different to forensic conferences. You're very colourful people, and there are bean bags, and I got socks. So it's I'm having a great time, but it did also cause me to reflect on what I am talking about. I was told that you can't have long wordy slides and you can't read from them. It's a bit of a different conference, and I thought, but oh my God, I'm talking about child sexual assault. How do I make that engaging, and how does one do this? So it did cause me to go back and think about the research we have done and the why behind it. And I think that was a really timely reminder at a time when I feel like I'm drowning in Excel documents and EndNote and thinking, why on earth would anybody do this? The why behind it, and I think the really obvious answer is the patient that's sitting in front of you in your consult room, and in this area, all the patients, all the young people out there who are yet to make it into the forensic examination consult room, and that's the why behind all that we've done. So just by way of background, there we go. Thought a very brief overview of the pathway of a victim of sexual assault, and this does vary a little bit state to state, so this is just quite general. But unfortunately, the majority of child victims of sexual assault will never tell anybody about what has happened to them, or they may disclose this many years down the track. That's the most common response. We know it's the most underreported crime in adults, but particularly in children. If they do disclose their sexual assault, you may come across this in a healthcare setting. They may present to a hospital because of injuries, or a GP, paediatrician, any frontline healthcare provider. They may report their assault to any trusted adult or trusted friend, youth worker, nurse, I mean, you name it. Everywhere we work, we are going to be encountering child victims of sexual assault. The police may become involved through any one of those pathways, or the child or their family may report directly to police as well. And this is where we sit in clinical forensic medicine. The police may then refer that case to a clinical forensic medicine service if the sexual assault has happened within sort of a relatively recent time frame, and they think that child may benefit from having a forensic medical examination. So that's where we fit in. We aren't always involved. I'd say we're involved in the minority of sexual assaults, but the role of clinical forensic medicine and the VFPMS is providing a 24-hour frontline service, clinical forensic medicine services to child victims of sexual assault, amongst all the other things that they do. This is one small part of what they do. And they conduct a forensic medical examination. So that, above all, addresses the medical needs of the child at that time. It involves taking a detailed history of the incident, a thorough examination documenting any injuries, and that's body injuries and anogenital injuries, and using photography to document injuries. It involves taking forensic samples, so DNA specimens. We collect clothing, any other evidence, and that's given to the police to take carriage of. And then a detailed, and then we facilitate the healthcare needs of the child, so whether that's mental health, STI assessment, treatment, immunisation, and referral back into their ongoing healthcare providers. And then the doctor would then write a detailed report, which may be used in the criminal justice system or may be used for protective purposes. So that's where we sit in the whole scheme of things. So, as I said earlier, I work at the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine, which is largely an adult service. And it was in the course of a pretty horrendous couple of weeks of night shift that I was reflecting on some cases and started to notice that patients were telling me they'd been sexually assaulted after meeting an offender on a dating app. And it sort of struck me that there were some common themes to these cases. There was a real shock that, the person that they'd gone to meet hadn't turned out to be like who they were online. And there was what I thought was an added layer of shame around these sexual assaults. I went to their house. Has this happened to anyone else? So I started to look into this further and was quite surprised at the time to find that there wasn't much literature out there about what I was seeing, which made for a much easier literature review. So that was, I suppose, good, as that was my beginning, that was my sort of entry into research. There's a lot of information about cyber stalking and things, but not much about real-life contact sexual assaults after people meeting online. So I published a very small audit of my own cases because we weren't previously recording this, and was really surprised. This actually got a fair bit of media attention, which was really respectful reporting, and victims came forward, and downstream it led to some really positive changes about how police can access data from dating apps. And it definitely, I think, served to reduce the stigma around reporting some of these sexual assaults. I was also working at the paediatric forensic service at the time, and that's where things seemed to be with Dr. Jo Tully, who's speaking after me, and we were also noticing the same thing there in paediatrics. But there just wasn't the same level of conversation about it. And when we tried, we even submitted some articles and got our first ever rejection because people just didn't seem to want to hear about what we were seeing. And we were seeing children who, like their adult counterparts, were meeting people online and then having an offline, real-life contact sexual assault as a result. And it didn't seem like anybody was really talking about it. Dr. Jo Tully, who's the Deputy Director of the VFPMS, had been concerned about this for some years, so much so that she'd even conducted an audit a few years prior to me starting working there, but the numbers were quite small at the time, so had sort of sat with it. But it wasn't until our serendipitous cross-pollination that we decided again to look further into this, because no one else seemed to be asking, what about the children? There were isolated media reports about cases occurring, so we knew this was happening elsewhere. But then I think it really, I suppose, motivated us to try and answer some of these questions and understand this phenomenon more when we reflect upon the why. And these are de-identified case examples, but these are based on a number of cases who are all very similar and very typical of what we were seeing. So Marcus, age 15, has been communicating with people on the app Grindr. He's not meant to be on Grindr because it's meant for 18-year-olds and above. It is an adult dating app. And Marcus has been using it to meet people and communicate with people. And for the most part, he's found that quite, that's been a positive thing for him. Marcus goes to meet someone in real life. He's been communicating with them for a couple of weeks and seems like a nice person. The person says he's 18. So Marcus goes to his house where Marcus is sexually assaulted. He's anally sexually assaulted, and the male turns out to be about 20 years older than what Marcus thought. And then there's Amelia, age 14, and Amelia finds it difficult to talk to people. She prefers her own company and finds it difficult in social situations. Amelia has been using the app Snapchat to meet people and to talk to people. And Amelia's been communicating with someone on Snapchat who friended her on Snapchat for about a week. And Amelia is really flattered that this boy seems to be really interested in her. So much so Amelia thinks she's in love with him. She's never met him in real life. So when the boy asks Amelia to send him some photos of her naked, Amelia initially is reluctant and says no, but the boy says, "If you love me, you'll send me these photos." So reluctantly Amelia does, and then he asks for more, and then she does it again. And then the male asks Amelia to meet him in real life, and initially Amelia says no, but he says, "If you love me, you'll come and meet me." So she does, and she tells her mother that she's at a friend's house, and Amelia goes to a park to meet this boy. And at this point, the male takes her into the public toilets and pushes her inside and sexually assaults her, orally, vaginally, and anally. At the time of the forensic exam, Amelia's mother explains how Amelia didn't disclose this initially because she was so worried about getting in trouble for having lied to her family about her whereabouts. And Amelia's mother asks through tears, "Has this happened to anybody else?" So that's our why. That's why Joe and I decided that we need to be able to answer these questions for Amelia's mother and for Amelia and for Marcus and for all the Amelias and the Marcuses who are yet to make it into the examination room. So we decided to explore this further, and given that there wasn't much existing research in this area, there's a lot of information on online sexual harms against children and online grooming, but there really wasn't much about real-life contact sexual assaults after meeting online, and there was nothing in the Australian setting. We decided to conduct an audit over the last 7 years of our forensic examination caseload and compare that to the 7 years prior that Joe had already done an audit in. And our main aims were to characterise these sexual assaults in order to better understand them, to hopefully, shining a light on it was our primary aim, and to try and increase conversation about this, but then also to better understand what's going on to help inform education and prevention. So we did an audit of 12 to 17-year-old cases that had been seen over the prior 7 years, and we were specifically looking at characteristics of the victims, characteristics of the online communications, and then also characteristics of the sexual assault itself. And what we found did shock us. For the first half of the study, so 2007 to 2013, technology-facilitated sexual assault comprised about 4% of caseload, so that's about 1 in 25. For the second half of the study, it was about 1 in 7 cases that we'd seen at the forensic service were technology facilitated. But interestingly, in the final 2 years of the study, so 2019, 2020, technology facilitated sexual assault comprised 1 in 5 forensic exams that we'd been doing. So the next few slides talk about our findings, just descriptive findings looking at the technology-facilitated sexual assault cases. So we have a data set of 70 cases, and to our knowledge it's the largest in the world, so our humble little audit actually turned out to be a bit more powerful than we thought. And these are the findings looking at the 70 cases. So in terms of the victims, the average age of victims was 15. More than 50% of the victims were in the 14 to 15-year-old age group. But what we didn't expect was that 10% of the victims were in the 12 to 13-year-old age group. The vast majority of the victims were female, with a very small number being male and non-binary. 80% of the victims lived at home with their parent or parents, and 10% of the victims lived in residential care, so that's overrepresentative in this sample. At the time of their sexual assault, 60% of the victims reported being impaired in some way. That's either by drugs, alcohol, or mental health or a cognitive impairment. And interestingly, for the kids in residential care, 70% reported being drug affected at the time of their sexual assault, compared to 10% of the children living at home. Now, I think it's important to acknowledge the limitations in our data being retrospective in nature, so that there are gaps in the data here because it wasn't collected for the purpose of doing this. In future, we are recording cases with much greater detail, but with regard to offenders, all of the offenders were male. The majority of offenders were single male offenders. There are only about 4 or 5 cases where there were multiple perpetrators reported. We've got a small amount of data about the ages of these offenders, and it varied greatly. In where it was recorded, about 3/4 of the cases were older male offenders, many of whom had lied about their age, and the range was up to 26 years older than the victim, average age being about 10 years older. But about 1/4 of the cases were peer-aged offenders, so that's technology-facilitated sexual assault perpetrators who are themselves children. With regard to where the sexual assaults were taking place, we had a complete data set for this, and just over 1/3 took place at the alleged offender's home, and another 1/3 took place in a public place, and that was mainly public toilets as well as public parks. And having explored this with the adult population, this was quite different. In adults, the majority of sexual assaults occur at the offender's home, and I think that reflects children and transport and differences there. 96% of the sexual assaults involved an allegation of penetration, and over 1/3 involved an allegation of penetration of multiple sites, so that's been vagina, anus and oral penetration. Where there was an allegation of penetration with the penis, in 3/4 of cases there was no condom used. So that means that these cases are medically high risk, placing that child at risk of sexually transmitted infections and unwanted pregnancy. And with regard to physical assault as well, there was an allegation of an associated physical assault in 1/4 of cases, and that included non-facial strangulation or neck compression, blunt trauma such as blows, kicking, strikes, as well as biting. Again, we had limited data about the online communications prior to the assault, and that's something we are improving in our mechanisms moving forward. But the vast majority of sexual assaults occurred at the first face-to-face meeting after a period of online communications, and more than 80% were at that first face-to-face meeting. And what was really interesting, and reflected also in the limited existing literature, is the duration of that online communication before the first face-to-face meeting. So it was quite variable. There were some cases that matched online, met on the same day, and were sexually assaulted all on the same day, so within 24 hours. And then there were other cases that had quite prolonged online communication, weeks to months, there were a number of cases, there was up to a year of online communication only before that first face-to-face meeting. And that again is quite different to the adult population that usually meet within sort of 1 or 2 weeks. We did have limited information again about the communication platforms and how these have evolved over the 14 years of the study. So you can see going back to 2007 to 2013, the majority were Facebook. There are a few blasts from the past there, like MySpace. And 2014 to 2016, dating apps appeared. So about 1/5 of the cases reported to us were facilitated by dating apps. And most recently, up until 2020, that's where Snapchat appears. So just under half of the cases were reported to be facilitated by Snapchat, which is a social media platform that enables time-limited image sharing, not typically thought of as a dating or meetup app. And concerningly, just under 1/3 of the cases most recently were facilitated by dating apps, and that included Tinder, Grindr, Scout. And this concerns us greatly because these dating apps are for 18 plus. These are adult dating apps that children should not be able to be accessing. So what do we think's going on? And I think remembering that our research is truly the tip of the iceberg and is limited to only those cases that had a forensic medical examination, but putting our research in context with what we do know globally, we think there is a perfect storm going on. It's well recognised that there's an online disinhibition effect where you're more likely to think that a relationship is at a more advanced stage when communicating online, and children trust that person. In many of the cases, the child thought they were in a romantic relationship with that person online who they'd never met in real life. So that failure to recognise someone online as a real life offline stranger. And I think that's supported by some of the language around this, like friending functions, and also the serendipity of these meetups, which is actually facilitated by geolocation technology. With regard to the offenders, I think there's an increased expectation of sexual activity and a perceived time investment. I mean, some of these offenders have been communicating with the child for up to 12 months before that first face-to-face meeting. And I think the anonymity afforded by these platforms, A, in being able to deceive someone, but B, in just the sheer scale of what is going on is unprecedented. I mean, it is literally a smorgasbord, and some of these offenders can have multiple interactions with children on the go at the same time, and facilitate interactions in a way that previously you'd have to know someone in real life to be able to come into contact with them. And that also raises, it enables access to children who might be more vulnerable in the community as well. And I think overlying all of this are reporting barriers. So the themes of there's increased shame, stigma, I deserved it. It's not really a rape because I went there willingly. I wasn't snatched off the street, kicking and screaming by a stranger. I actually went there. I thought he was my boyfriend. So a lot of myth busting that I think it's really important that we target head on. So fortunately, there has been a little bit more attention now about this area, and we're really glad to be shining a light on it. And again, thank you for your attention today in shining a light on this. I think we're really privileged being healthcare providers, working frontline with young people in this day and age where you have to run to keep up with a lot of the changes in technology. And for the most part, it's an amazing thing that they can literally have the world at their fingertips in their hand. But I think it's also important that we shine a light on these sort of darker bits that do hide in the shadows. So take-home messages, technology-facilitated sexual assault is happening to our children, and the proportion seen at our clinical forensic service has increased over the last few years. It represents a much higher proportion now than it did previously. It is with certainty that we're experiencing the tip of the iceberg, both because of the quality of us being able to look back and, at a time when we weren't recording it, but also because of all those barriers to reporting, to actually getting a forensic exam. And we know the majority of these cases will have never been reported. And I think this has also been a really valuable lesson for me as someone who's actively avoided for most of my junior medical career engaging in any research. This has really shone a light for me on the importance of something as simple as a clinical audit and just having your ear to the ground, eyes and ears to the ground in your frontline interactions with young people to capture emerging trends, to shine a light on new things, particularly in this era of rapidly evolving technology. So I'd like to again thank you all for your for being here today, because it's something that it has taken us a while to get people interested in, because it's a tricky topic, but we're really glad to be shining a light on it. And for the Marcuses and the Amelias who are using their social media apps right now, who are yet to make it into the forensic rooms, I think it's really important as healthcare practitioners that we can understand what's really going on out there. And Jo will be talking next as well about reframing this as a health issue that we can all be part of. Thank you.